It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. We're looking at the different ways the Department of Veterans Affairs is changing under the Trump administration in the midst of looming job cuts and other policy changes in Washington. The White House unveiled a budget blueprint earlier this month that calls for an increase to spending to veterans' medical care by $3.3 billion. That includes funding to address veterans' homelessness. But back in February, the federal government announced plans to cut around 80,000 jobs from the VA nationwide, and Wisconsin hosts roughly 11,000 VA federal employees. To learn more about veterans issues in Wisconsin, we turn to Rock Larson from the County and Tribal Veteran Service Officer Association in Wisconsin. He's been a Wood County Veteran Service Officer for more than 20 years. Rock, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Good to be here.
You served in the Air Force. You were also an active duty soldier in the Army National Guard. What services, what benefits through the VA have helped you the most in your life?
Well, for me personally, VA healthcare, I use it as my primary care as a disabled veteran. Thankfully, I've just, a lot of small things occurred over the 20 years I was in service. But the healthcare is phenomenal, second to none in central Wisconsin. So that's the major benefit I receive, and some disability payments.
Do you find that improved your quality of life when you have had those benefits?
It truly does. The healthcare is crazy in Wisconsin or anywhere in the United States. I am blessed with having both the county's healthcare for myself and my family. As a military retiree, I have TRICARE, but I primary use the VA system. It's convenient. Happens to be 4 blocks from my office, but that's beside the point. Plus, I use it predominantly to be able to navigate the system so I can help my clients who don't have the choices I do to understand their VA healthcare benefits.
Are the healthcare benefits in jeopardy as you look at the changes coming down from the Trump administration?
Absolutely not. The benefits, none of the, from what I've read on the May 2nd budget document that was sent out, there's no cuts being made to benefits. In fact, they're increasing money to expand the network with both VA brick and mortar facilities and the staff, or the practitioners at least, and the access to the private sector when the VA just doesn't have the capacity or the specialists that your health needs.
You're referencing President Trump's budget blueprint from this month, a skinny budget calling for an increase for medical care and electronic health record modernization and a decrease for IT systems and general administration. How would your organization feel about these changes? What do you see there?
Well, you're always skeptical about change, but it's, where they're putting the money in benefits and especially healthcare is exciting. We're looking forward to that, and definitely the homelessness initiative. We do have concerns. Everybody should have concerns about the general cuts to non-benefit delivery or non-healthcare. These people hopefully are doing something, and the cuts are, but where there's efficiencies to be made, I guess, every American should be in favor of that. It's just we need to make sure that we're not getting rid of the wheat as we get rid of the chaff. It needs to be investigated and properly, the right positions be eliminated and cross-leveled so that the timeliness and quality of the veterans' benefits is still there. I mean, timeliness is is a huge issue with disability claims. Some may take just a couple days, but most of them take several months or more to go through the process.
Can you speak to what you do in your work and the services your center provides to local veterans?
Yeah, so the county and tribal veteran service officers in Wisconsin receive no federal funds. We are funded by local government and a small grant from the state. So, thank the counties and tribes for their continued support of us. But pretty much anything that deals with veterans, we can try to assist. We have visibility on the disability process. We go through special training and definitely extensive privacy training from the VA I can actually look at a veteran's claims folder as he goes through the process. I can read his disability exam. I can challenge the decisions the VA makes before they actually finalize it and get them from my or the veteran's perspective. So we deal with
and in
applications for
general,
healthcare.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Applications for healthcare, troubleshooting healthcare, and billing with healthcare. There's in some cases minor copays, disability claims, education, burial benefits, pretty much anything the federal or state VA does. We're the boots on the ground focal point that they should come to, and we're free. We cannot charge for any of our services other than the property taxes in the county that they already pay.
Rock, when you sit down with a veteran across from you, do they and their families understand what they are eligible for in general?
Absolutely not. In most cases, they come into our office for one thing. It might be as simple as a application for the veteran's identifier on their driver's license. And we identify that, you were exposed to Agent Orange after Vietnam in Guam. Do you have any of these disabilities? And all of a sudden, they're service connected for their cancer, and the VA's paying for their treatment. And so they think they know what they want. They come in for one thing, and hopefully we all take the time to see if there's anything possibly that you may be entitled to.
We're talking about the Department of Veterans Affairs and how policy changes in Washington, layoffs at the VA could affect Wisconsin veterans. Rock Larson is here, Wisconsin County and Tribal Veterans Service Officer for Wood County in the central part of the state. In a congressional hearing last week, Rock, Secretary of Veterans Affairs Doug Collins answered questions about these looming layoffs. And this was a hearing in the U.S. Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, and he said that the VA doesn't plan to lay off doctors or nurses.
We're going to maintain VA's mission-essential jobs like doctors, nurses, claims processors, while phasing out non-essential roles like interior designers and other things. DEI. This is savings we can achieve that will be redirected to veteran health care and benefits.
So when Secretary Collins says the VA will phase out non-essential roles, what comes to mind for you? Is there anything you think the federal government would consider non-essential that would hurt veterans to lose?
I have no idea what they're looking at. I've never heard of interior designers. I do know that there are some engineering people at a major hospital facility like Toma, Wisconsin. The VA footprint there is always being changed and updated and to meet the needs. So they've got all sorts of different people. I don't know what exactly they contract out and what they employ in-house, because there's a lot of lawns to mow there. I don't know if they have a service or if that would be something that would be considered non-essential, that could be contracted out at a savings. And that's where we hope they will take a good hard look on what can we do outside of the VA, what can we do inside. But there are also people that schedule. There's a release of information people where I will send a release from the veteran to the hospital, and they will then print out their medical records, and I can review them and use that in support for their disability claims. So
that visibility to you is very important, but those resources need to be there as well. In this hearing, though, House Democrats expressed how, they say, look, you can't shrink the VA without affecting its healthcare system. I'm wondering, what message have you been sending to Wisconsin's congressional delegation?
I know they're veteran staffers all for my district, at least, Senator Van Orden's staff, Congressman Baldwin and Johnson's. In fact, I was in meetings with their staffers this week, or last week. We were at a conference in Superior, and Senator Johnson's representatives there. So we talk with them constantly on if we have a problem, but there's no specifics yet to discuss concerns over. I mean, I've talked we had a presentation video conference from the regional office director last week, and yesterday I was in a meeting with the Toma VA hospital director, and both of them are, their concerns are not really concerned. They're still trying. They're going to do the best they can with the resources they have, and they're awaiting further guidance on any of these reorganization efforts from the central office in Washington.
You feel you have their ear, though, that they're hearing you.
The directors are, and the legislators are, yes.
Rock, thank you for joining us.
It is a pleasure, and we're here to help veterans understand, and their survivors or their dependents, understand their benefits and apply for them. We do it all day, every day.
Thank you for your
stuff
service.
Every week.
Rock Larson, Wisconsin's County and Tribal Veteran Service Officer in Wood County. We've been discussing the experiences of Wisconsin veterans in this moment. If you or someone you know is in crisis, call or text 988. Coming up on Wisconsin Today, as communities mark Hmong American Day, find out about an exhibit highlighting a half-century of Hmong resettlement in Wisconsin.
It's been actually really healing to hear people's stories and to make these kinds of connections and realizing that people are not alone.
That's next on Wisconsin Today. It's Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. Data center developments are popping up across Wisconsin. State and local leaders say the projects will help grow local tax bases. But as Joe Schultz reports, critics argue the big tech companies behind those projects are set to receive millions of dollars from taxpayers.
When the Port Washington City Council met to approve zoning for data centers last month,
all alderpersons are present.
Residents spoke out against the plan in nearly an hour of public comment.
I feel the project is much larger than our small community can handle.
In my opinion, this is yet another example of the government subsidizing corporations.
What steps can we take to stop this? What steps can you take to stop this?
The council ultimately adopted a zoning code update. It's one of several steps that will pave the way for the development of a data center campus. The city is working with a company called Cloverleaf Infrastructure to develop a project on nearly 2,000 acres of land. Mayor Ted Knightsky says the community has lost a lot of its manufacturing base over the last few decades, shifting the tax burden onto residents.
We are an exporter of our labor. People who live in Port Washington commute out of Port Washington. So our internal infrastructure is hard to maintain because there's nobody there during the week to go out to lunch and go shopping.
He says a data center could add over $1 billion in property value to the city.
We will double the valuation of our city. So if you do the math, once that's all online, if we double the valuation with one data center, you could theorize that could potentially cut personal property taxes in half.
It isn't the only community in Wisconsin looking to develop a data center. Similar projects are underway in Mount Pleasant, Kenosha, and Beaver Dam. In the last state budget, Wisconsin passed a sales and use tax exemption for data centers. It allows developers to avoid paying sales tax on most purchases supporting the development and operation of a data center. Developers with state approval need to invest between $50 to $150 million over 5 years. But Wisconsin and 13 other states have data center incentives that never expire. Kasia Kartinska is with a national nonprofit that tracks subsidies.
Because there is no limit of how much companies can benefit from these tax breaks or for how long, these programs can become very expensive very fast.
In 2023, the nonprofit found that 15 data center incentive programs drained a small number of communities of almost $1.5 billion in revenue. The State Department of Revenue estimates the exemption will provide a typical data center with a sales tax decrease of $8.5 million during construction, with an ongoing annual deduction of more than $700,000. So far, Microsoft, Epic Systems in Verona, and a developer using an alias have been approved for the state subsidy. Missy Hughes leads the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. She argues the property tax revenue from data centers makes up for the lost sales tax revenue.
That revenue then allows the community to think about building a new school or building a new firehouse. And so that, I think, has ancillary economic development benefits.
Wisconsin's incentives are not tied to job creation. Data centers typically only create between 100 and 200 permanent jobs. Kartinska says it's often hard to find out how many people work at a given data center once it's online.
State and local governments do not track how many permanent jobs are actually created at these facilities. We do not know how much these workers are actually paid or where they come from.
In addition to state-level incentives, some communities are creating development agreements with data center developers, pledging to borrow for infrastructure improvements or provide incentive payments. Ted Knightsky says he would prefer any local incentive package for the Port Washington project last for a short period of time.
When we make financial decisions, I really struggle with long-term commitments that put another generation in charge of decisions we made.
Local incentives can extend the time it takes to see the full effect of property value increases. And if developments don't pan out as planned, cities could be on the hook for costs that they thought property value increases would pay for. Joe Schultz, Wisconsin Public Radio.
This is Wisconsin Today. The contributions of Hmong people are being recognized on this Hmong American Day. There are events planned for Appleton, Manitowoc, and La Crosse. More than 60,000 Hmong people live in Wisconsin, and this year marks the 50th anniversary of Hmong resettlement in the U.S. Thousands of refugees came to states like Wisconsin after facing persecution for helping U.S. forces in the Vietnam War. A traveling exhibit on display at the Wisconsin Historical Society looks back at the half-century of Hmong people making their home here in the state. Mai Si Tao is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology and Asian American Studies at UW-Madison and co-creator of this exhibit. Mai Si, welcome to Wisconsin Today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This exhibit, marking the 50th anniversary of Hmong people resettling in the U.S., finding a home in Wisconsin, what does this anniversary mean to you?
Yeah, so this anniversary, I've thought a lot about this anniversary. What does it mean to commemorate? Is commemoration a form of celebration, a form of mourning, right? And I think that this exhibit for this anniversary is really to mark Hmong life and living, right? But also to name Hmong historical trauma, but also moments in which Hmong people continue to heal and revitalize their culture and to live.
What does that look like in communities all over Wisconsin?
Yeah, that's as simple as, teaching your children to read and write in Hmong, right? It's as simple as learning how to farm. Hmong people make a big portion of the farmers market here in Wisconsin. My parents also sold in farmers markets as well. So, they're just remaking life here.
You've been working on this traveling exhibit for years about Hmong people in Wisconsin with stories about their families fleeing war-torn Laos. And this exhibit currently on display at the Wisconsin Historical Society. What went into creating this exhibit? What did you learn on this journey?
Yeah, well, this is actually, I'm just one of the co-curators, right? And it's a big team of Hmong community members, scholars, activists, and artists who came together who just wanted to actually see an exhibit on Hmong that was contrary to what we typically see out there. So challenging a heavily militarized narrative, right, to really focus on Hmong women, queer youth, elders, and looking at their stories and their lived experiences as also historical moments. So what all went into it, it was such a long process. We were first inspired by the Hmong Story 40 out in California, but also the Hmong Minnesota exhibit. So just kind of connecting with them and understanding the grassroots efforts and partnering with institutions and community members. So, taking that kind of knowledge and that information, we helped to just really build this collective movement to work with community partners to inspire this exhibit.
Along the way, I imagine you heard so many stories of trauma, stories of healing, stories that go deeply into one's personal history. How did you prioritize to then explain these stories in one exhibit?
So I'm a medical anthropologist by training, right? And I always caution against telling trauma narratives, right? Not to tell trauma narratives because it's, exciting, right? But to be really cautious about what that can do. And, the work that we've done, it's been actually really healing to hear people's stories and to make these kinds of connections and realizing that people are not alone, right? And so that has been a really healing component, and making sure that we're not asking for the traumatic stories, but asking for the stories that they're willing to tell, not forcing them to tell more than what they need to, right?
Do your own stories come to light through this exhibit? Because this is deeply personal. Your family has a story as well.
Yeah, so as the community, our community curators, we were thinking that we were going to go in the community and collect these stories. And you know what? Turns out we're also the community, right? The community does not exist outside of us. And so I was actually able to look into my own personal archives and be able to actually find that we have so many archival documents from when we were in the refugee camps, right? But also the things my parents carried with them from Laos to Thailand, and then making the trip here to the U.S.
What were some of the things that they carried with them?
Yeah, so from Laos, my mom had a silver necklace, which was for her firstborn son, who passed shortly after 1975. And then also a French Indochina coin, which really speaks to the history of French colonialism in Laos, which a lot of people typically don't know about. And then the things that they carried from the refugee camps, right? Hmong pandao, or story cloths, right, that were not sold in the camps. And just all the refugee documents that they carried that included medical examinations, right, x-rays. So refugees were subjected to a lot of medical scrutiny to make sure that they were healthy and fit to come to the U.S. And so we actually have a medical document that consists of names of a bunch of other people, my brother including, that list people's medical conditions, mental health, and, these were so sacred because if they lost these documents, right, that would ultimately, impact whether they could come to the U.S.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
A part of the exhibit are these story cloths. Can you explain what story cloths are and what they are able to communicate?
Story cloths are these Hmong textiles that were produced in the refugee camps to depict Hmong flight out of Laos. And so typically it's you have these images of Hmong people leaving Laos, crossing the Mekong River and going to Thailand, and then the refugee camps. And so these were story cloths that were produced in the camps to actually, sell to Westerners, to Thai folks, in order to have money to live in the refugee camps because food was hard to come by. People in refugee camps suffered a lot, and so they made these textiles to sell.
It's interesting that they are a commodity as well. They're not just art, but they are also a story of survival to eat.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's interesting because the story cloth has now become so symbolic of what it means to be Hmong, right? But how do we also, unpack that history of why the story cloth came to be?
You tell your students that you're a small town girl from the Appleton area. What was it like for you growing up as a Hmong person?
Yeah, so I actually grew up in rural Wisconsin, in a small town between Appleton and Green Bay. And we were one of 3 families that were Hmong, and only family of color in this little small town. And, I grew up with working class, white folks, farmers, right? And, I just never saw myself represented in the world, right? There was this one moment in history class where my history teacher was telling the class that history is what I tell you, right? He told us that, there was the Vietnam War, Americans fought in it, but there were other people in it. And he looked at me and he winked. And he didn't say that Hmong people were a part of it, but he knew. Right, and that, for me, has been a really interesting moment to think about the secrecy of the war and the omission of information from history, right? And so, as I've told my students, this is also an American history, right? We are here because the U.S. was there.
We're talking about Hmong resettlement in Wisconsin as cities around the state observe Hmong American Day. And we have Mai Zi Tao, assistant professor of anthropology at UW-Madison. May 14th is designated as Hmong American Day in several Wisconsin communities, Appleton, Manitowoc, and La Crosse. What can an official observance like this mean for Hmong communities around the state?
Hmong American Day, it has, from what I can see, right, it's just such a moment of celebration. Because so much of Hmong history has been secreted, right, or omitted in history textbooks. And, I've seen that the community is really excited about finally having that kind of recognition. Yeah, but for me, thinking about Hmong American Day is also a moment of mourning. Hmong people are refugees that are a product of war. And how do we recreate the world in a way that these conditions don't have to create more refugees?
The state legislature is set to pass resolutions. One is commemorating the 50th anniversary of Hmong people arriving in Wisconsin. The other recognizing the Hmong Lao Veterans Day. How are these proclamations being received by the Hmong community? What are your insights?
I think that these proclamations are important. They are long overdue. And recognizing Hmong Lao veterans is really important because they have never received the kinds of recognition that they've needed, given the fact that they've supported the U.S. as proxy soldiers.
What about the intergenerational transmission, if you will, of young people, young Hmong people who are communicating and being so close to their Hmong elders and also being accepted among their peers and in their classrooms and in, as they take part in their communities? Is that a tricky intersection, if you will?
Yeah, it's not easy, right? So you'll see that in the exhibit there are moments in which Hmong people, in the early 90s struggled with what it meant to be a Hmong in the U.S., as well as trying to assimilate, right? And that in itself was very contentious. But then you also see moments where their parents coming to the U.S., like I mentioned earlier too, but not being able to see themselves in the world, and that they made that possible for their children, right? By making sure that they wore Hmong clothes and reminding them that they were Hmong and showing them Hmong videos and teaching them how to read and write in Hmong. And how, it's interesting because in that moment, I think people don't realize that actually was a moment of revitalization, right? And it's very powerful. And so what's been fascinating is to see that there is another generation who is probably the second and third generation that are actually embracing these things, whereas the generation, like my generation, really kind of pushed back against some of that, right, and had a little bit more ambivalence towards it.
That's so interesting. If there's one thing you want people to take away from this exhibit, what would it be?
So I'm, like I mentioned, I'm a medical anthropologist, and as an anthropologist, we tell stories about the world so that we can understand what it means to be human, right? And so what I want people to take away from this exhibit is to understand that that the wars that we fight abroad, don't stay abroad, right? They also show up at home and in the private space, and in ourselves as well. And that this exhibit teaches us what it means to be human, the humanity, the resilience, and the ambivalence in the work of having to work through all of that. And ultimately, I want people to not just take away things, but actually to see themselves in it.
This exhibit comes as President Trump is accelerating deportations of immigrants. What are your thoughts there and that impact on the Hmong community?
So a partner that I work with, Southeast Asian Resource Action Center, they talked about how these moments are actually traumatizing for Southeast Asian refugees, right? That they could actually, it re-triggers memories of people disappearing, being taken away from the streets, right? And not knowing where people are going to be. And so it is a very difficult moment. I think for some Hmong, right, they've connected their own experiences to what they're seeing in the world right now and are asking for change and advocacy. Yeah.
Maisie, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
Maisie Tao is an assistant professor in the Department of Anthropology and Asian American Studies at UW-Madison. She joined us to talk about the history and living traditions of Hmong communities in Wisconsin as the state commemorates the 50th anniversary of welcoming Hmong refugees. The Hmong exhibit runs through Friday at the Wisconsin Historical Society in Madison. Still ahead on Wisconsin Today, meet a Wisconsin researcher working with people in wheelchairs to help make the experience as user-friendly and injury-free as possible.
We really want to keep their arms as healthy as it can be so they can do all the activities that they want to do.
That's next from WPR News. This is Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. Now it's time for Wisconsin Life. Here's producer Maureen McCullum with a story about coaching soccer.
Athletes in youth sports are often told things like, it's not about winning, it's about having fun. Sure, but what if you haven't won a single game all season? That's something Eau Claire writer-in-residence Ken Szymanski dealt with as a soccer coach. He shared a story about it at a live Wisconsin Life storytelling event in Eau Claire at the Lakely.
It's August in Wisconsin, and my son's Parks and Rec soccer season has nearly reached its less than inspiring conclusion. His team, the Broncos, sits at 0 wins and 10 losses. I can't blame the coach because I am the coach. Do you know how difficult it is to be in charge of morale when your team is 0-10? I can give the Broncos only so many variations on the "it doesn't matter if we win or lose" speech, because when they're 11 years old and we lose every single time, it does matter. And even if I hide it well, it affects me as a coach too. But this isn't about me. Sure, I don't want my son to watch me coach his team to a winless season, but I also don't want him to go through a winless summer. I don't want any of these kids to only feel loss after loss after loss and have that become our summer's legacy. So we're all on this sinking ship together with one last game that could serve as our collective life raft. There are no standings in Parks and Rec soccer, so each game is a fresh start. Let's end this season on a high note, I say. And the players good-naturedly take their positions on the field. Less than a minute after that speech, the Cheetahs zigzag the ball through our defense and score an easy goal. Here we go again. Keep fighting, Broncos, I yell. Keep hustling. After some back and forth, we work the ball downfield. Charging toward the goal, Mashana passes to Allie, who kicks it past the goalie's outstretched hands and into the net. Broncos score! Like a defibrillator, it's a shock to the system, jolting our team to life. 4 minutes later, Mashana is left alone with the ball near midfield, and she boots a high floater and into the net for another goal. Now we have something we haven't had all season, a lead. I can feel the shift in our team's mindset. All the frustrations from all those losses suddenly becomes fuel, a hidden reservoir of high-octane fuel unavailable to winners and champions. For the rest of the game, we are in overdrive. With a 1-goal lead, the ticking clock becomes our savior. 5 minutes left. I can't do this for them, but I can pace the sidelines. I can yell encouragement. I can contort my body with each shot. 1 minute left. Don't let them steal this from us. Just hold on. Finally, the ref blows the whistle, and victory is ours for the first and final time. Our team runs off the field like World Cup champions. In Parks and Rec summer soccer, it's not whether you win or lose. Sometimes it's when you win or lose. And on this late Thursday night in August, the Broncos will ride their season finale, 1-game winning streak, straight into the setting sun.
Ken Szymanski shared that piece at a live storytelling event in Eau Claire at the Lakely. It was hosted by WPR's Wisconsin Life and the Chippewa Valley Writers Guild. To hear his full story, go to wisconsinlife.org or check out the Wisconsin Life podcast. Wisconsin Life is a co-production of Wisconsin Public Radio and PBS Wisconsin in partnership with Wisconsin Humanities. Additional support comes from Lowell and Mary Peterson of Appleton. I'm Maureen McCullum.
This is Wisconsin Today. Each day, millions of people use manual wheelchairs to get around. On average, they're turning the wheels more than 1,000 times per day. This constant motion can have a big impact on a person's shoulders and joints. So how can wheelchairs be improved to better suit the needs of the users? And what movements have the least impact on joints and shoulders? More than a decade ago, an engineering professor at UW Milwaukee started a lab to explore those kinds of questions. Today, Brooke Slavens is director of the Mobility Lab in Milwaukee. The goal is to better understand the movements and improvements of manual wheelchairs. And her focus is the human in the chair. She recently talked with Rob Farrett.
What led you into studying wheelchairs, wheelchair movements, and how it affects the bodies of people who are using wheelchairs?
It's a very prevalent problem. There's over 3.6 million wheelchair users, and over 90% of them use manual chairs. So it's something from a scientific perspective that needs a lot more attention than what it's getting. Some of my first work was with children with orthopedic disabilities, where we first started investigating different assistive technologies for rehabilitation. And we noticed right away that there was more work that needed to uncover better design of devices, as well as helping individuals that are using wheelchairs to be able to preserve their arms for everything they need to do to live a really high quality life.
I'm not a wheelchair user, so I hadn't really thought about this before. But then reading about your work, I'm like, duh, of course, if you're using a manual wheelchair, you're pushing that wheel a lot. You're using a particular set of muscles a lot each and every day. Can you talk about how that can go well or go poorly?
Right. So when propelling your own chair, it's estimated roughly you might push your chair over 1,000 times per day. And when you think of individuals that are using a wheelchair throughout their lifespan, that really adds up fast. So what we're studying is that cumulative trauma that can happen to your shoulders through overuse. You know, your arms weren't intended for a repetitive, high force, high stress type of activity. So by using a chair, it's healthy for your body from an exercise cardiovascular perspective, but it can also lead to a number of secondary musculoskeletal conditions, such as pain of the shoulder, early onset arthritis, and even rotator cuff tears in these individuals. So it's something that we really want to keep individuals healthy and active and in their manual chairs as long as possible. But we also want to keep their arms as healthy as it can be so they can do all the activities that they want to do.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of your work now. What are you doing to figure out how to best fit a wheelchair and how to use it best to prevent those kind of repetitive motion injuries?
Right. So we're using a combination of motion capture technologies, which is similar to what's done in Hollywood for movies to look at movement and how you're moving. We can combine that with different personalized computer models or computational models to look at loading of the joints to understand how much force is being placed on the shoulder, the elbow, the wrist, hand. And then we can also pair that with imaging. So our team is also deploying ultrasound imaging to look inside of the shoulder to understand what's happening at the musculature level.
We're talking to Brooke Slavens, director of the Mobility Lab at UW-Milwaukee, professor there of mechanical and biomedical engineering, about her work with wheelchair users to help prevent repetitive motion injuries and other problems that can come along with wheelchair use. You've been doing this for over a decade, I understand. What kind of results do you hear from people who maybe have found a new and better way to use this assistive device?
We've been able to provide different feedback to individuals in a couple different ways. One is we've designed different wheels over the years that can help decrease the amount of load where they might have gearing that is instrumented into the wheel, similar to a bicycle. We've also worked to analyze different ways you can move your arms. So similar to how swimmers have different strokes that they use at a pool, we can also train individuals to use different arm patterns or stroke patterns to move in a better way or a different way that might be more personalized to their needs. And then we've also looked at different ways that the wheelchair itself can be configured and how the fit of the chair or the size of the chair can also help improve their efficiency of their movement and how they're getting around. So wheelchair fit is another area that I think a lot of individuals can relate to, where you can have custom seating, custom footrests, armrests, anything that you name. You can really fine tune it to make it fit the way that you need for your body. And with kids especially, this is really important as they change and grow and need to have different changes made to the actual chair itself.
Yeah, I was wondering, does your work go to wheelchair designers or manufacturers to say, hey, here are some things that can make this more customizable or a better fit for people?
At times, we have been able to work closely with different wheelchair companies to provide some new ideas for technology and partner with them. That's something that we would love to continue to help work with to develop new ideas. Same goes for clinical guidelines for care of their shoulder and for their movement, that we would love to get this work to the patients, that want the technology and need to use the technology. So at the end of the day, that's one of the most rewarding aspects of what we do, is being able to get it into the patient's hands.
Something that strikes me here is this can't be a one-size-fits-all solution for everybody. The answers might be different for that 12-year-old kid versus that 60-year-old person, or based on shape and size and reason for needing the wheelchair in the first place. How important is it to customize these solutions to a particular person?
Absolutely. That is exactly correct. And that's some of the driving motivation behind what we're doing in our lab. We're one of the few groups in the world that is looking at pediatric manual wheelchair users. And it's so important because they're changing and growing so fast. And even as adults, as you transition to adulthood and even, age, there can be changes that need to happen, and changes not only in growth and skeletal maturation, but just changes in your body size and changes in the activities that you do or the places you go. So it's always something that continues to change, that requires more of a personalized understanding of the solutions, and also personalized customization of their wheelchairs for the users too.
A takeaway, it sounds like to me, for people in wheelchairs, their families, their healthcare providers, I would imagine some people think, well, you're using a wheelchair, there's going to be shoulder pain, end of story. But it doesn't necessarily have to be that way, does it?
Right, exactly. And especially with kids, a lot of the mindset is like, oh, they're young and they're kids, they're not going to have pain or shoulder rotator cuff tears. They probably don't have that. And we're finding that that's actually the opposite case, where we are finding that these early and young individuals do have concerning, tears and other, complex pathology happening in their shoulder, similar to the adults. And it is also, I think, kind of misunderstood in the sense that just because you're using an assistive device, whether that's a wheelchair, walkers, crutches, you shouldn't have to have pain and secondary conditions that result from that. And there are a lot of ways that we can change what those individuals do and how they're using it to be able to prevent such things from occurring.
Brooke, thanks for joining us, and thanks for sharing your research with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
And that is Brooke Slavens. She is the director of the Mobility Lab at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and a professor of mechanical and biomedical engineering. She talked with my co-host, Rob Ferret, and the goal of this lab is to better understand the movements of manual wheelchairs to improve the experience for the people who use them every day. You can share about a technology or a research area that is making a difference in people's lives. Tell us about the work you're doing to make advancements and solutions in your area. What are the aha moments and what difference have these breakthroughs made, especially here in Wisconsin? Get in touch with us. Email wisconsintoday@wpr.org. That's wisconsintoday@wpr.org. Tomorrow on the show, we'll learn about the latest research on managing chronic back pain. And there's a new study out that says talk therapy and mindfulness interventions have a positive effect on people who are taking medication to reduce the pain. And we want to hear your story about managing chronic back pain that doesn't involve taking a medication. Is it stretching or yoga? Is it mindfulness exercises? Maybe you're part of a support group. What have you tried? What works for you? Email us, wisconsintoday@wpr.org. That's wisconsintoday@wpr.org to talk about managing chronic back pain. You can also call or text us at 888-642-0232. That's 888-642-0232. Wisconsin Today producers include Avery Lee Rogers, Rochelle Wilson, and Mackenzie Crummy. Our technical directors are Lee Rayburn and Tyler Ditter. Learn more about us at wpr.org/Wisconsin Today. I'm Kate Archer-Kent. You're listening to WPR News.